On a brutal winter night high in the frozen mountains, a desperate knock shatters the silence of a lonely cabin. Outside stands a stranger clutching his dying son, but letting them in means inviting dangers she can't imagine. One woman, one choice. One night that will change everything. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The wind came down from the peaks like something alive and angry, tearing through the pines and rattling the shutters of the small cabin perched on the ridge. Inside, Eliza Harrow sat cross-legged on the floor near the stove, needle and thread working slowly through a torn wool blanket. Her fingers were stiff from cold despite the fire crackling a few feet away. The cabin held heat about as well as a sieve held water. She didn't mind the cold as much as she minded the silence. 3 years she'd been up here. 3 years since she'd walked away from everything. From the town, from the promises people made and broke, from the man who'd smiled at her in church and then sold her father's land out from under her the week after the funeral. 3 years of learning how to split wood, how to trap rabbits, how to make a dollar stretch until it screamed. The needle slipped. She cursed under her breath and sucked at the bead of blood welling on her thumb. That's when she heard it. Knock, knock, knock. Eliza froze. Her first thought was the wind. Sometimes a branch would swing against the door. But branches didn't knock 3 times with that kind of rhythm, that kind of intention. She set the blanket aside and stood slowly, listening. The wind howled, the fire popped, and then knock, knock, knock. Harder this time, desperate. Eliza's heart kicked up. Nobody came up here. The trail was barely passable even in summer, and now, in the dead of January with snow piled waist-high in the drifts, it was damn near suicidal. She moved toward the door, then stopped. Her hand hovered over the latch. "Who's there?" she called out. The voice that answered was rough, cracked from cold. "Please, my boy, he's freezing. Please." A man. And a child. Eliza closed her eyes. Every instinct she'd honed over 3 years alone screamed at her to stay put, to let the night take whoever was fool enough to be out in it. People didn't just wander up mountains in blizzards. People who did were running from something, and she'd learned the hard way that other people's trouble had a way of becoming your own. But a child. She pulled the latch and cracked the door open. The wind nearly ripped it from her hands. Snow blasted into this cabin, and through the swirling white she saw him, a tall man, broad-shouldered, hatless, his coat crusted with ice. In his arms he held a small bundle wrapped in what looked like a saddle blanket. The bundle wasn't moving. "Jesus," Eliza breathed and shoved the door wide. "Get in, now." The man stumbled inside and she threw her weight against the door to force it shut. The wind fought her, but she won, slamming the latch home. When she turned, the man was already on his knees by the stove, unwrapping the child with shaking hands. The boy was maybe 5 or 6, his lips blue, his face pale as candle wax. He wasn't shivering. That was bad. Eliza had seen frostbite before, seen what happened when the cold got so deep the body just gave up. "How long's he been like this?" she demanded, dropping to her knees beside them. "I don't know." The man's voice was hoarse. "An hour. Maybe more. We got turned around in the storm. Couldn't find the trail." Eliza didn't waste time asking why they were out there in the first place. She grabbed the boy, light as a bird, and carried him closer to the stove. "Get those wet clothes off him, all of them. I need blankets." The man moved fast, his hands clumsy but determined. Eliza pulled open the trunk at the foot of her bed and dragged out every quilt and blanket she owned. By the time she turned back, the boy was stripped down to nothing, his skin mottled and cold to the touch. She wrapped him tight, then pulled him into her lap, holding him against her chest. "Talk to him," she said to the man. "Say his name. Don't let him drift." The man crouched beside her, his face so close she could see the ice melting in his dark beard, the raw fear in his eyes. "Evan," he said, his voice breaking. "Evan, you hear me? Stay with me, son. Stay with me." The boy didn't respond. Eliza rubbed his arms through the blankets, trying to work warmth back into him. The man kept talking, low and steady, and Eliza found herself listening to the cadence of his voice even as she worked. It wasn't a local accent, too flat, too measured. Eastern, maybe. Educated. What's your name? She asked without looking at him. Cole. Cole Mercer. Where were you headed, Cole Mercer? He hesitated. Just a beat, but she caught it. West, he said finally. Toward the timber camps. Liar, she thought, but she didn't press. Whatever he was running from could wait until the boy wasn't dying. Minutes crawled past. Eliza kept rubbing, kept holding. Cole kept talking. And then, finally, the boy's eyelids fluttered. A shiver ran through him. Then another. That's it, Eliza whispered. That's it, sweetheart. Come on back. Evan's eyes opened, unfocused and glassy. Papa? Cole let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Right here, Ev. Right here. Eliza eased the boy toward his father, and Cole gathered him up, holding him like he was made of glass. For a long moment, the only sounds in the cabin were the fire and the wind and the ragged breathing of two people who'd just outrun death. Eliza sat back on her heels, suddenly aware of how fast her heart was pounding. She looked at Cole, really looked at him for the first time. He was younger than she'd first thought, maybe 30, with a hard, weathered face that didn't quite match the quality of his coat. Even soaked and half frozen, the wool was good, expensive. And his boots, those weren't work boots. Those were custom made. You're a long way from anywhere, she said quietly. Cole met her eyes. His were dark, unreadable. So are you. Fair enough. She stood and moved to the stove, ladling hot water from the kettle into a tin cup. She added a pinch of dried mint and a spoonful of honey, luxuries she rarely touched, and brought it to Cole. Get him to drink this. Slow. Thank you. He said it like he meant it. Eliza just nodded. She turned away and started pulling her own wet things off, her shawl, her outer skirt. She was soaked from the snow that had blown in, and standing around in wet wool was a good way to join them in hypothermia. She changed quickly, keeping her back to them, and then set about hanging everything near the stove to dry. By the time she was done, Evan was sitting up, sipping from the cup with Cole's hand steadying his. Color was coming back into his face. He looked at Eliza with wide, serious eyes. You saved me, he said. Eliza's throat tightened. Your papa saved you. I just let you in. That was enough, Cole said. She didn't answer. Instead, she pulled the pot of stew she'd made that morning back onto the heat and started cutting bread. Her hands moved automatically, but her mind was racing. She'd let them in. That was the first mistake. The second would be letting them stay. But she couldn't throw them back out into the storm. Not tonight. You can sleep here tonight, she said, not looking at them. Tomorrow, if the weather clears, you move on. Cole nodded slowly. Understood. They ate in silence. Eliza watched the boy, Evan, tear into the bread like he hadn't eaten in days. Maybe he hadn't. Cole ate more carefully, but she saw the hunger in the way he scraped the bowl clean. When they were done, she pointed to the narrow cot against the far wall. You take that. I'll sleep on the floor. No, Cole's voice was firm. You've done enough. We'll manage. It's not a discussion, Eliza said. The boy needs a proper bed. You can both fit if you try. Cole looked like he wanted to argue, but Evan was already sagging against him, eyes half closed. He sighed. Thank you. Eliza made herself a pallet near the stove, using the saddle blanket Cole had carried and one of the thinner quilts. It wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't the first time she'd slept on the floor. She banked the fire and blew out the lamp, and the cabin fell into darkness. She lay there listening to the storm batter the walls, listening to the soft, even breathing of the boy, listening to the silence from Cole's side of the room. He wasn't asleep. She could tell by the way the quiet felt, too deliberate, too tense. Why are you really up here? Cole's voice came through the dark, low and careful. Eliza stared at the ceiling. Could ask you the same thing. Fair enough. Silence again. Then Eliza heard herself say, I got tired of people. Cole made a sound that might have been a laugh. Yeah, I know that feeling. She wanted to ask what he was running from. She wanted to ask why a man with expensive boots and a well-fed child was stumbling around a mountain in a blizzard. But asking meant inviting answers, and answers meant getting tangled up in whatever trouble he'd brought with him. So she didn't ask. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep. Morning came gray and bitter. Eliza woke to the smell of coffee, which was strange because she hadn't made any. She sat up, stiff and sore, and saw Cole crouched by the stove, feeding it kindling. The pot was on, steam curling from the spout. "You found the coffee," she said. He glanced over. "Hope that's all right. Figured I owed you." Eliza pushed to her feet, wincing as her back protested. "Where's the boy?" "Still asleep." Cole nodded toward the cot. Evan was curled under the blankets, his face peaceful. "He's all right. Color's good." Eliza moved to the window and peered out. Snow. Everywhere. The world was buried in it, the pines sagging under the weight. The sky was still low and heavy, promising more to come. "You're not going anywhere today," she said. "No," Cole agreed. "Doesn't look like it." She turned to face him. In the thin morning light, he looked older than he had last night, tired, with shadows under his eyes. But there was something solid about him, something that didn't match the desperation she'd seen when he'd stumbled through her door. "Why were you out in that storm?" she asked bluntly. Cole poured 2 cups of coffee and handed her one. "Bad luck. Bad timing. That's not an answer. It's the one you're getting." Eliza took the coffee. It was strong and bitter and exactly what she needed. She studied him over the rim of the cup. "You in trouble?" "Depends on your definition. The kind that follows you, the kind that knocks on doors in the middle of the night." Cole's jaw tightened. "Not yet." Not yet. That was almost worse than yes. Eliza drank her coffee and tried to decide what to do. The smart thing would be to wait out the storm and send them on their way the second the weather broke. The smart thing would be to keep her distance, keep her walls up. But then Evan stirred and sat up and looked at her with those wide, serious eyes, and she felt something in her chest shift. "Morning," the boy said shyly. "Morning," Eliza replied. "You hungry?" He nodded. She made breakfast, cornmeal mush with a little molasses, the last of the bread toasted over the fire. Evan ate like he'd never seen food before, and Cole watched him with an expression Eliza couldn't quite name. Pride. Relief. Fear. After breakfast, Cole insisted on helping. Eliza tried to refuse, but he was stubborn. He hauled in wood from the lean-to, restacked the pile by the door, checked the chimney for blockages. He moved like a man who knew his way around hard work, even if his hands said otherwise. She noticed the blisters forming, the soft skin that hadn't seen calluses in a while. Evan trailed after her like a shadow, asking questions about everything. Why did she live alone? Where was her family? Did she have a dog? Could he help her with the mending? Eliza answered carefully, giving just enough to satisfy him without opening doors she didn't want opened. But the boy had a way about him, a quiet sweetness that made it hard to stay guarded. By midday, the storm had eased to a sullen drizzle of snow. Cole stood at the window, staring out at the white expanse, his shoulders tense. "You really that eager to leave?" Eliza asked. He turned. "I don't want to be a burden." "You already are," she said bluntly. "Question is whether you're the kind of burden that's worth keeping." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or respect. "What's that supposed to mean?" Eliza set down the pot she'd been scrubbing. "Means I'm not stupid. You're running from something. I don't know what, and maybe I don't want to. But that boy deserves better than freezing to death on a mountain because his father's got ghosts on his tail." Cole's face went hard. "You don't know anything about what he deserves." "I know he deserves a father who's not half dead from whatever he's carrying." The words came out sharper than she'd meant them to, and she saw Cole flinch. For a moment, she thought he'd snap back, but instead he just looked away. "You're right," he said quietly. "You're absolutely right." Eliza hadn't expected that. She crossed her arms, suddenly uncomfortable. "Look, I'm not trying to— No, you are trying. And you should." Cole turned back to her, and the hardness was gone, replaced by something rawer. "I got him into this. I have to get him out." "Then tell me what this is." He opened his mouth, closed it, shook his head. "I can't. Can't or won't. Does it matter?" Eliza stared at him. She wanted to be angry, but all she felt was tired. Tired of secrets, tired of walls, tired of being alone on this damn mountain with nothing but ghosts and silence for company. "Storm will break tomorrow," she said finally. You can leave then. Cole nodded. Thank you. But he didn't move toward the door, and she didn't ask him to. The second night was quieter. Evan fell asleep early, exhausted from exploring every corner of the cabin. Eliza sat by the fire mending socks, and Cole sat across from her, whittling a piece of wood with a knife he'd pulled from his pack. The only sounds were the scrape of the blade and the crackle of the flames. Where'd you learn to do that? Eliza asked, nodding at the wood. My father. Cole didn't look up. He said a man should know how to make something with his hands. Smart man. Not really. The knife slipped, and Cole swore under his breath. He set the wood aside and sucked at his thumb where he'd nicked it. Eliza smirked. Thought you said he taught you. He taught me a lot of things. Doesn't mean I was good at any of them. She went back to her mending. After a moment, she said, You don't have to tell me what you're running from. But if it's going to show up here, I deserve to know. Cole was quiet for a long time. Then he said, It won't. I'll make sure of it. How? By leaving. Eliza looked up. His face was shadowed, but she could see the set of his jaw, the tension in his shoulders. You care about him, she said. The boy. He's my son. That's not what I asked. Cole met her eyes. Yes, I care about him, more than anything. Then stop running. It's not that simple. It never is, Eliza said. But running doesn't fix anything, just makes the road longer. Cole looked like he wanted to argue, but instead he just picked up the wood and started whittling again. Eliza watched him for a moment, then went back to her socks. They didn't speak again that night. The third day, the storm finally broke. The sun came out pale and cold, glinting off the snow. Eliza woke to the sound of an axe biting wood, and when she looked out, she saw Cole splitting logs in the clearing behind the cabin. His coat was off despite the cold, and sweat darkened the back of his shirt. She pulled on her boots and went outside. What are you doing? Cole sank the axe into the stump and straightened. You're low on firewood. Figured I'd repay the hospitality. I didn't ask you to. I know. Eliza studied the pile he'd already built. Neat, even splits, stacked tight. He'd done this before. Thought you were leaving. I am. Cole pulled the axe free and set another log on the stump. After I finish this. She wanted to tell him to stop, to just go, to take his son and his secrets and leave her alone. But she didn't. Instead, she went back inside and started making breakfast. Evan was awake, sitting at the table with a scrap of paper and a pencil, drawing something. He looked up when she came in. Miss Eliza? Just Eliza's fine, honey. Eliza, can we stay here? Her hand stilled over the pan. What? Papa says we have to leave, but I like it here. It's quiet, and you're nice. Eliza's throat tightened. Your papa's probably got places to be. He always has places to be, Evan said, his voice small. But we never stay anywhere. She didn't know what to say to that, so she just ruffled his hair and went back to cooking. By the time breakfast was ready, Cole had finished the wood and was hauling water from the creek. He came in red-cheeked and breathing hard, and Eliza poured him coffee without a word. They ate in silence. When they were done, Cole stood. We should get moving. Daylight's burning. Evan's face fell. Eliza looked away. Cole gathered their things, the saddle blanket, the packs, the few belongings they'd brought. Evan put on his coat slowly, dragging his feet. When they were ready, Cole turned to Eliza. Thank you, he said, for everything. Eliza nodded. She didn't trust herself to speak. Cole opened the door, and that's when they heard it. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses, coming fast up the trail. Cole went rigid. His hand moved to his belt, and Eliza saw the gun there for the first time. Get inside, he said quietly. What? Now. He shoved Evan toward her, and Eliza caught the boy, pulling him back into the cabin. Cole stepped outside, and she heard voices, men's voices, rough and demanding. Cole Mercer? Eliza's blood went cold. She moved to the window, pulling Evan with her, and peered out. There were 4 of them. Hard-looking men on hard-looking horses, their coats dusted with snow. The one in front was older, with a gray beard and eyes like chips of flint. Who's asking? Cole said evenly. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Name's Dawson. I work for the railroad. And you, Mr. Mercer, are a hard man to find. Eliza's heart pounded. Railroad. That explained the expensive boots, the educated voice, but it didn't explain why 4 armed men had tracked him to the middle of nowhere. I don't have business with the railroad anymore, Cole said. Your father thinks different. Cole's jaw tightened. My father's dead. No, he's not, and he wants you home. The silence stretched. Then Cole said, Tell him I'm not coming. Dawson's smile faded. That's not how this works, boy. I'm not your boy. One of the other men moved his hand toward his gun. Eliza's breath caught, but Dawson raised a hand, stopping him. Let's not make this messy, Dawson said. You come with us, peaceable-like, and nobody gets hurt. You make trouble, and well. He glanced toward the cabin. Be a shame if something happened to that lady in there. Or the boy. Eliza felt Evan tense against her. She wrapped her arms around him, her mind racing. Cole stood very still. Then slowly, he raised his hands. All right, he said. I'll go. But you leave them alone. Deal, Dawson said. And just like that, it was over. One of the men dismounted and pulled Cole's hands behind his back, binding them with rope. Cole didn't resist. He just looked back at the cabin once, his eyes finding Eliza's through the window. She saw the apology there, the regret. Then they hauled him onto a horse and rode away, leaving nothing but hoofprints in the snow. Eliza stood frozen, Evan trembling in her arms. The boy was crying silently, his small body shaking. They took Papa, he whispered. I know, honey, Eliza said, her voice numb. I know. She stood there long after the hoofbeats faded, staring at the empty trail, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Railroad, father, Dawson. Cole Mercer wasn't just running, he was being hunted, and now whatever he'd been running from had found him. Eliza didn't move for a long time. She stood at the window with Evan pressed against her side, watching the tracks in the snow until her eyes burned and the cold from the glass seeped through her dress. The boy had stopped crying, but his breathing was still uneven, hitching every few seconds like something broken trying to work. Miss Eliza, his voice was small. Are they going to hurt him? She wanted to lie, wanted to tell him everything would be fine, that his father would come back, that men like Dawson didn't do the things their eyes promised. But she'd been lied to enough in her life to know how it tasted, and she wouldn't feed that poison to a child. I don't know, she said quietly. Evan pulled away from her and walked to the table. He sat down hard, his legs swinging above the floor, and stared at his hands. Eliza watched him for a moment, then forced herself to move. She went to the stove and added wood, though the cabin was already warm. Her hands needed something to do. He didn't tell me, she said, more to herself than to the boy. Didn't tell me what he was running from. Papa doesn't tell anybody anything. Evan's voice was flat, older than it should have been. He says it's safer that way. Eliza turned to look at him. Safer for who? For me. Evan met her eyes, and she saw something in them that made her chest ache, a kind of tired understanding that no 6-year-old should carry. People come looking for him sometimes. Papa says if I don't know things, I can't tell them by accident. That's a hell of a way to live. Evan shrugged. It's the only way I know. Eliza crossed the room and sat down across from him. She folded her hands on the table, trying to find words that wouldn't break either of them. Your mama, is she dead? The word came out quick and clean, like he'd said it so many times it didn't hurt anymore. Papa doesn't talk about her much, but I remember a little. She had yellow hair, and she used to sing. Eliza's throat tightened. I'm sorry, honey. It's okay. It was a long time ago. Evan picked at a splinter in the table. Papa takes care of me. He's good at it, mostly, except when we have to run. You run a lot? Yeah. Evan looked up at her, but this time felt different. Papa was scared. I could tell. Eliza thought about the way Cole had watched the horizon, the tension in his shoulders, the gun at his belt. Do you know what the railroad is? Papa used to work for them, I think. He doesn't talk about it. Evan's face scrunched up, thinking. But sometimes people call him Mr. Mercer real formal-like, and he gets mad, says that's not who he is anymore. Mr. Mercer, son of a railroad man, if Dawson was telling the truth. Maybe more than just a railroad man. Maybe someone important enough to send 4 armed riders into the mountains to drag him back. Eliza stood and started pacing. The cabin felt too small suddenly, the walls pressing in. She'd spent 3 years up here specifically to avoid other people's problems, and now she had a traumatized child at her table and a stranger's life weighing on her conscience. The smart thing would be to take Evan down to the nearest town, hand him over to the sheriff, wash her hands of the whole mess. But she'd seen the way Cole had looked at his son, the way he'd held him that first night, like the boy was the only thing in the world worth saving. And she'd heard the way Dawson had threatened them, casual as commenting on the weather. "Miss Eliza?" Evan's voice pulled her back. "What are we going to do?" She stopped pacing and looked at him. "I don't know yet. Papa told me once that if something happened to him, I should find the preacher in a town called Grafton. He said the preacher would help me." "Where's Grafton?" "I don't know. Papa just said it was east." Everything was east from here. Eliza rubbed her face, feeling the exhaustion of the last 3 days catching up with her. She needed to think, needed to figure out what the hell she'd gotten herself tangled up in. "You hungry?" she asked. Evan shook his head. "Well, I am, and you're going to eat anyway." She moved to the shelf and pulled down what was left of the cornmeal. Her supplies were getting low. She'd need to make a trip to town soon, which she'd been putting off because town meant people and people meant questions she didn't want to answer. She made Johnny cakes on the griddle, working in silence while Evan watched. When they were done, she set them on the table with a little butter and the last scraping of jam from the jar. Evan ate mechanically, not tasting anything. Eliza forced herself to eat too, though the food sat in her stomach like stones. She kept thinking about Cole's face when Dawson had mentioned his father, the way his whole body had gone rigid, like he'd taken a punch. "Evan," she said carefully, "your grandfather, is he alive?" The boy's hand stilled on his fork. "I don't know. Papa never talks about him." "But you've never met him?" "No, ma'am." Eliza sat back. A father who wanted his son back badly enough to send hunters. A son who'd rather freeze on a mountain than go home. Whatever was between them, it was uglier than just family disagreement. She was still turning it over in her mind when she heard it, the sound of a horse coming up the trail. Just one this time, moving slow. Eliza's heart kicked. She stood fast, grabbing Evan's arm. "Get in the back room. Don't come out until I tell you." "But now." The boy scrambled off the chair and disappeared through the curtain that divided the cabin. Eliza went to the door and pulled it open, her hand finding the old shotgun she kept propped in the corner. She didn't know if it would even fire. She'd never had cause to use it, but it looked threatening enough. The rider came into view, and Eliza's grip on the gun tightened. But it wasn't Dawson or any of his men. It was a woman, older, wrapped in a heavy coat and riding a sturdy sorrel mare. She pulled up short when she saw Eliza in the doorway. "Easy there," the woman said, raising her hands. "I'm not here to cause trouble." "Then why are you here?" The woman dismounted slowly, keeping her movements careful. She was maybe 60, with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. "Name's Ruth Carver. I run the supply store down in Birch Hollow. Got word you might need help." "From who?" "From a very nervous cowboy who got himself tied to a saddle about 3 hours ago." Ruth tied her horse to the porch rail and climbed the steps. "He asked me to check on you. On his boy, specifically." Eliza lowered the gun slightly. "He asked you?" "Well, he didn't have much chance to ask. But when Dawson's bunch stopped in town to water their horses, your man managed to get my attention. Told me where to find this place and said there was a child that needed looking after." Ruth's eyes were sharp. "Figured that was worth the ride." Eliza studied her, looking for the lie. But all she saw was a tired woman who'd climbed a mountain in the snow because someone had asked her to. She stepped back. "Come in." Ruth stamped the snow off her boots and entered. Her eyes went immediately to the curtain. "Boy back there?" "Yeah." "He hurt?" "No, just scared." Ruth nodded. She crossed to the table and set down the bag she'd been carrying. "Brought some supplies. Figured you'd be running low." Eliza watched her unpack. Flour, salt, coffee, dried beans, a small wheel of cheese. More than Eliza could have afforded if she'd had the money. "I can't pay you for this." "Didn't ask you to." Ruth finished unpacking and looked at her. Where's the boy? Eliza hesitated, then called, Evan, you can come out. The curtain moved and Evan peered around it. When he saw Ruth, his face went wary. It's all right, Eliza said. She's a friend of your father's. I wouldn't say friend, Ruth corrected, but I know him well enough to know he's in a bad spot, and that means you are too. Evan crept out slowly. Ruth studied him with the same sharp eyes she'd turned on Eliza, then nodded to herself. You look like your mother, she said. Evan's head snapped up. You knew her? Met her once. Long time ago. She came through Birch Hollow with your father, back before things went sideways. Ruth pulled out a chair and sat down without asking. She was a good woman, too good for the mess she got tied up in. What mess? Eliza asked. Ruth looked at her. You really don't know who Cole Mercer is? He said his name was Cole. That's all I got. Ruth made a sound that might have been a laugh. Well, that's like saying John D. Rockefeller's name is John. Technically true, but missing the point. Eliza felt something cold settle in her stomach. What's the point? The point, Ruth said, is that Cole Mercer is the sole heir to the Mercer Railroad fortune. Or he was, until he walked away from it 6 years ago. The room went very quiet. Eliza heard the fire pop, heard Evan's breathing, heard the wind rattling the shutters, but mostly she heard the echo of Ruth's words, rearranging everything she thought she knew. Railroad fortune, she repeated, one of the biggest in the country. His father, Edmund Mercer, owns half the lines west of the Mississippi, and Cole was supposed to inherit all of it. Ruth leaned back in her chair. But Cole had other ideas. Married a girl Edmund didn't approve of, tried to make his own way. Edmund didn't take it well. What happened? Ruth's face darkened. What always happens when powerful men don't get their way. Edmund made life hell for them. Blacklisted Cole from every legitimate business, spread rumors, called in favors. Made sure they couldn't settle anywhere without trouble following. She glanced at Evan. Then the boy's mother got sick. Needed medicine they couldn't afford because Edmund had frozen every account Cole had access to. Eliza felt her stomach turn. She died because of that? That's what Cole believes. Whether it's true or not doesn't much matter. Belief is what drives a man. Ruth's voice was matter of fact, but her eyes were sad. After she died, Cole took the boy and disappeared. Been running ever since. Edmund's been trying to get him back just as long. Why? Eliza demanded. If he hated Cole enough to do all that, why not just let him go? Because Cole's his only child, and Edmund Mercer doesn't lose things that belong to him. Ruth stood and walked to the window. He's been sending men after Cole for years. Never this close, though. Something must have changed. Eliza looked at Evan. The boy was staring at his hands again, his face pale. He'd heard all this before, she realized. Maybe not the details, but the shape of it. The weight of being the reason his father couldn't stop running. What'll they do to him? Eliza asked quietly. Take him back to the family estate in Philadelphia. Lock him up until he agrees to play the dutiful son again. Ruth turned from the window. Or until he breaks. And if he doesn't agree? Ruth's silence was answer enough. Eliza's hands clenched into fist. She thought about Cole chopping wood in the cold, about the way he'd stepped between his son and danger without hesitation, about the apology in his eyes when they'd taken him. He'd been protecting them. Even then, there has to be something we can do, she said. We? Ruth raised an eyebrow. You planning on going up against the Mercer Railroad? I'm planning on not letting a good man get dragged back to a bad situation. You've known him 3 days. Long enough to know he doesn't deserve this. Ruth studied her for a long moment. Then she smiled, a small, tired smile that said she'd been hoping Eliza would say exactly that. All right, then you need to know what you're up against. She pulled a folded newspaper from her coat and spread it on the table. It was dated 2 weeks ago, from a Philadelphia paper. The headline read, Mercer Railway Expansion Hits Snag. Board Demands Heir's Return. Eliza scanned the article. It talked about stock prices and investor confidence, and board members demanding that Edmund produce his son to secure a major deal. The implication was clear. Without Cole, the whole empire was at risk. Edmund's backed into a corner, Ruth said. He needs Cole to show up, sign some papers, play the part of the prodigal son returning. Otherwise, He loses control of the company he built. So this isn't about family. With men like Edmund Mercer, it's always about money. Family is just the excuse. Eliza looked at Evan. And what happens to the boy? If Cole cooperates, they'll use him as leverage. Keep him comfortable. Keep him close. Make sure Cole knows what he's got to lose if he steps out of line again. Ruth's voice was grim. If Cole doesn't cooperate, well, Edmund's not known for his sentimentality. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind had picked up again, moaning through the pines. Eliza felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her, heavy as the snow on the roof. She could walk away, take Evan to that preacher in Grafton, let the adults sort it out. She'd done her part. She'd saved them from freezing, given them shelter. Nobody could ask more than that. But she kept thinking about the look on Cole's face when he'd thanked her, the way he'd called her out for telling hard truths, the way he'd fixed her woodpile without being asked. "How long ago did they leave?" she asked Ruth. 3 hours, give or take. "How fast can they travel in this snow?" Ruth caught on quick. "Not as fast as a woman on a good horse who knows the mountain trails." "Why?" "Because I'm going to get him back." "Eliza," Ruth's voice was sharp. "You don't know what you're talking about. Dawson's not just some thug. He's one of Edmund's best men, and those riders with him aren't going to let you just walk up and ask nicely." "I'm not planning to ask." Eliza moved to the trunk at the foot of her bed and started pulling out clothes. Her riding skirt, her heavy coat, the boots she saved for hard weather. "You stay here with Evan. Keep him safe." "And what exactly are you going to do?" "I don't know yet." Eliza yanked on the boots. "But I'll figure it out on the way." "This is insane." "Probably." Eliza grabbed the shotgun and checked the shells. 2 left. She'd have to hope they were enough. "But I didn't haul that man and his boy out of a blizzard just to let him get dragged back to some gilded cage." Ruth shook her head, but she was smiling. "You're either the bravest woman I've met or the most foolish. Can it be both?" "Usually is." Ruth pulled a pistol from her coat and set it on the table. "Take this. It's loaded and it doesn't jam. You'll need it more than I will." Eliza stared at the gun. It was small, nickel-plated, the kind of thing a woman could hide in a pocket or a purse. She picked it up carefully. "I've never shot anyone." "Let's hope you don't have to start today." Ruth glanced at Evan. "But if it comes down to you or them, don't hesitate. Men like Dawson don't give second chances." Eliza nodded and tucked the pistol into her coat. She turned to Evan, who was watching her with wide eyes. "Miss Eliza, you're going after Papa?" "Yeah, honey, I am." "Why?" It was a fair question. Eliza crouched down so she was eye level with him. "Because your father's a good man who got dealt a bad hand, and because nobody should have to face their worst fear alone." Evan's lip trembled. "What if something happens to you?" "Then Ruth will take care of you, and you'll go to that preacher in Grafton like your father said." Eliza reached out and squeezed his shoulder. "But I'll do my best to come back." Promise? She wanted to. But she'd learned long ago that promises were just pretty words that broke easy. "I'll try my hardest, that's all I can give you." Evan nodded slowly. Then before she could stand, he wrapped his arms around her neck and held on tight. Eliza froze, then slowly brought her arms up to hug him back. The boy was shaking. "Bring him home," Evan whispered. Eliza's eyes burned. "I'll do my damnedest." She pulled away and stood. Ruth was watching her with an expression that was hard to read. "There's a trail that cuts east through the ridge," Ruth said. "Steep, but it'll shave an hour off their route if you know where you're going. I'll draw you a map." "Thank you." Ruth pulled out a stub of pencil and sketched quick lines on the back of the newspaper. "Follow the creek until you hit the split. Take the left fork and climb. You'll come out above the main road, right where it passes through Devil's Canyon. That's your best chance to catch them." Eliza studied the map, committing it to memory. "And then what?" "Then you'd better be as clever as you are stubborn." Ruth folded the paper and handed it to her. "Because you're not going to win a straight fight." "Wasn't planning on one." Eliza gathered the rest of her gear, a water skin, some dried meat, matches, an extra scarf. She moved fast, not letting herself think too hard about what she was doing. If she stopped to think, she'd realize how insane this was. She was one woman with a shotgun and a borrowed pistol going up against 4 armed men to rescue someone she barely knew. But when she looked at Evan sitting at the table, small and scared and trying so hard to be brave, she knew she didn't have a choice. She'd spent 3 years alone on this mountain, hiding from a world that had hurt her. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. Eliza pulled on her coat and headed for the door. Ruth followed her out to where the mare was tied. "Her name's Rosie," Ruth said. "She's sure-footed and she's got stamina. Don't push her too hard on the climb." Eliza swung into the saddle. The mare shifted under her, testing, then settled. "I'll take care of her." "See that you do. And Eliza?" Ruth looked up at her, her face serious. "If this goes bad, don't be a hero. Just get yourself out and come back. The boy needs someone, and it might as well be you." Eliza nodded. She didn't trust herself to speak. She turned the mare toward the trail and kicked her into a trot. Behind her, she heard Ruth go back inside, heard the door close. Then there was just the sound of hoofbeats and the wind and her own heart hammering in her chest. The trail down the mountain was treacherous, slick with ice and hidden roots. Eliza let the mare pick her way carefully, using the time to think. Ruth was right. She couldn't just charge in. She needed a plan. The problem was, she didn't know the first thing about plans. She knew how to survive, how to keep her head down, how to make a dollar stretch. But outsmarting four-armed men, that was something else entirely. She thought about what Ruth had said. Dawson wasn't just some thug. He was one of Edmund Mercer's best, which meant he was smart, experienced, and probably wouldn't fall for anything obvious. But he was also arrogant. She'd seen it in the way he'd smiled at Cole, the way he'd made his threat so casual. Men like that always underestimated women. Maybe she could use that. The trail leveled out and Eliza pushed the mare faster. The sun was high now, glinting off the snow, and the cold bit through her coat. She followed Ruth's direction, staying close to the creek until it split. Then she took the left fork and started climbing. The mare struggled on the steep grade, her breath coming in white clouds. Eliza talked to her softly, keeping her steady. "Come on, girl, just a little further." They climbed for what felt like hours. Eliza's legs ached from gripping the saddle, and her hands were numb inside her gloves. But finally the trail crested and she could see down into the canyon below. The road cut through it like a scar, narrow and winding. And there, maybe half a mile ahead, she saw them. 4 riders moving slow through the snow, one of them with his hands bound. Eliza's pulse kicked up. She'd found them. Now she just had to figure out what the hell to do next. She dismounted and led the mare into the trees, tying her where she'd be hidden from the road. Then she crept to the edge of the canyon and looked down. The drop was steep, but not impossible. If she was careful, she could get down there before they passed. But then what? She checked the pistol Ruth had given her. 6 shots. The shotgun had 2. 8 bullets total against 4 armed men. Not great odds. Eliza closed her eyes and tried to think. Cole was in the middle of the group, his horse being led by one of the riders. Dawson was in front, scanning the trail ahead. The other 2 were behind, relaxed and talking. If she could separate them somehow. An idea started to form. Stupid, dangerous, with about 100 ways it could go wrong. But it was all she had. Eliza moved back to the mare and untied her. She led her along the ridge until she was ahead of the riders, then found a spot where the slope was gentle enough to risk. She climbed into the saddle and started down. The mare slid more than walked, her hooves scrambling for purchase. Eliza held on, her heart in her throat, until they reached the bottom. She pulled up behind a stand of rocks and waited. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder. Eliza could hear voices now, one of the men laughing about something. She tightened her grip on the shotgun. When they were close enough that she could see Dawson's face, she kicked the mare out into the middle of the road. The riders pulled up short. Dawson's hand went to his gun. "Easy," Eliza said, keeping her voice steady. She had the shotgun pointed at the ground, trying to look scared rather than threatening. "I'm not looking for trouble." Dawson's eyes narrowed. "You're that woman from the cabin." "Yes, sir." "What are you doing out here?" Eliza let her voice shake. "I came to ask about the boy, Evan. He left something behind and I thought, you rode all the way down here for that?" Dawson's voice was flat with suspicion. It seemed important. A little wooden horse, his father carved it. Eliza glanced at Cole. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were locked on hers. "I didn't want him to lose it." One of the men behind laughed. "Ain't that sweet? Lady's worried about a toy." Dawson didn't laugh. "Where is it?" "In my saddlebag." Eliza gestured behind her. I can get it if... Stay where you are. Dawson nodded to one of the men. Check her bag. The rider dismounted and walked toward the mare. Eliza's hand tightened on the shotgun. This was it. This was the moment where her stupid plan either worked or got her killed. The man reached the mare and started opening the saddlebag. And that's when Eliza raised the shotgun and fired both barrels into the air. The sound was deafening in the canyon. The horses screamed and reared. The man at the saddlebag fell backward. Dawson's mount bolted sideways, and for a few perfect seconds, there was nothing but chaos. Eliza dropped the empty shotgun and pulled the pistol. She aimed it at Dawson. Cut him loose, she said. Now! Dawson fought his horse under control. His face was dark with rage. You stupid bitch! You think that pop gun scares me? No. Eliza's hand was steady. But I think you're too smart to die over a job. Cut him loose and ride away. That's the deal. There is no deal. Dawson's hand moved toward his gun. Eliza pulled the trigger. The shot took his hat clean off his head. He froze. Next one goes between your eyes, Eliza said. Her voice didn't shake. Your choice. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then one of the other riders cleared his throat. Boss, maybe we should... Shut up. Dawson's jaw worked. He stared at Eliza, and she stared back. And she saw the moment he made his calculation. This job wasn't worth dying for. He jerked his head at the man holding Cole's lead. Cut him loose. The man hesitated, then pulled a knife and sawed through the rope binding Cole's hands. Cole pulled free and grabbed the reins, wheeling his horse toward Eliza. Go, Dawson said quietly. But this isn't over. Yeah, it is, Eliza said. Tell Edmund Mercer his son's not coming back. Tell him to stop sending men, or next time I won't miss. She backed the mare away, keeping the pistol trained on Dawson. Cole moved beside her. When they were far enough, Eliza turned and kicked the mare into a run. They galloped down the road, snow flying until the canyon was behind them and they were back in the trees. Only then did Eliza pull up, her hand shaking so hard she nearly dropped the pistol. Cole grabbed her arm. Are you insane? Probably. Eliza's voice came out breathless. Did it work? You just shot a man's hat off and threatened one of the most powerful families in America. Yeah, it worked. Cole's face was pale. But he's right. This isn't over. I know. Eliza looked at him. But for now, you're free. That's what matters. Cole stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Then he did something she didn't expect. He laughed. It was rough and shocked and maybe a little bit hysterical, but it was real. You're completely out of your mind, he said. So are you, Eliza shot back. We make a good pair. They looked at each other, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. The knowledge that they'd both just jumped off a cliff and there was no going back. Come on, Eliza said. Let's get you home. They rode back up the mountain together, and for the first time in 3 years, Eliza didn't feel alone. They didn't speak much on the ride back. The adrenaline that had carried Eliza through the confrontation was draining away, leaving her hollow and shaking. Her hands were still clenched tight on the reins, knuckles white, and every time she blinked, she saw Dawson's face, the cold calculation in his eyes, when he'd weighed whether killing her was worth the trouble. Cole rode beside her, his jaw set, his eyes scanning the trees like he expected another ambush any second. His wrists were raw from the ropes, angry red lines that had started to bleed. He hadn't said a word about them. When they finally crested the ridge and the cabin came into view, Eliza felt something in her chest loosen. Smoke curled from the chimney. The door was shut tight. Everything looked the way she'd left it. They dismounted, and before Eliza's boots hit the ground, the door flew open and Evan came tearing out, Ruth right behind him trying to grab his coat. Papa! The boy launched himself at Cole, who caught him and held on like he'd never let go. Evan was crying, his face buried in Cole's shoulder, his small hands fisted in his father's shirt. I got you, Cole murmured, his voice rough. I got you, Ev. It's okay. Eliza turned away, giving them privacy. Ruth was standing on the porch, arms crossed, her face unreadable. Well, Ruth said as Eliza climbed the steps, you're either the luckiest fool alive or the best shot I've ever met. Neither, Eliza's legs felt like water. She sat down hard on the step. Just scared enough to pull the trigger. Ruth sat beside her. For a moment they just watched Cole and Evan, the man still holding his son like the world might try to take him again any second. "What happened out there?" Ruth asked quietly. "I shot Dawson's hat off and told him to leave us alone." Ruth's eyebrows went up. "That's it?" "That's it. And he just let you?" "He made a choice. Figured his life was worth more than a job." Eliza rubbed her face. "But he was right. This isn't over." "No," Ruth agreed. "It's not. Edmund Mercer doesn't give up easy. He'll send more men." "How long do we have?" "Hard to say. Could be days, could be weeks. Depends how fast Dawson gets word back and how pissed off Edmund is when he hears what happened." Ruth pulled her coat tighter. "But they will come. You need to be ready." Eliza looked at this cabin, small, drafty, perched on a mountain miles from anywhere. It had been her refuge for 3 years, her hiding place. Now it felt like a trap. "What am I supposed to do?" she asked. "I can't fight off an army." "No, but you can make sure they don't have a reason to come after you." Ruth stood and brushed snow off her skirt. "That boy needs to disappear, and his father needs to make a choice. Either go back and face Edmund on his own terms, or disappear so completely that Edmund gives up looking. He won't go back. Then he better figure out how to vanish." Cole approached, Evan still clinging to him. His face was drawn, older than it had been that morning. "Thank you," he said to Eliza. "What you did was stupid," Eliza cut him off. "Ruth's right. They're going to come back." "I know." Cole shifted Evan's weight. The boy had his face hidden, but his breathing was calmer now. "I need to get him out of here, away from all this." "Where will you go?" "I don't know yet, but somewhere Edmund can't reach." He met her eyes. "You should come with us." The words hung in the cold air. Ruth made a small sound. Might have been surprise, might have been approval. Eliza just stared at him. "What?" "You shot at one of Edmund's men," Cole said. "Threatened his operation. He's not the kind of man who forgets that. If I disappear and you stay here, he'll send someone to ask questions, and those questions won't be polite." Eliza's stomach went cold. She hadn't thought about that. Hadn't thought past getting Cole free and bringing him back. But he was right. She'd made herself a target the second she'd pulled that trigger. "I can't just leave," she said, hearing how weak it sounded. "This is my home." "It's a cabin on a mountain," Cole said, not unkindly. "You can build another one somewhere else. It's not that simple." "Why not?" "Because she'd run once before and it had cost her everything. Because she'd spent 3 years building walls to keep the world out, and she didn't know how to tear them down. Because the thought of leaving, of starting over again in some new place with new people, made her want to crawl into bed and never get up. But she didn't say any of that. She just shook her head. Ruth cleared her throat. "I need to get back to Birch Hollow before dark. But before I go—" She pulled Cole aside, speaking in a low voice Eliza couldn't hear. Cole listened, nodded, asked a question. Ruth answered and handed him something small. He pocketed it. When Ruth came back to Eliza, her face was serious. "I left extra supplies inside. Enough for a few weeks if you're careful. After that, you're on your own." "Ruth, don't." Ruth held up a hand. "I like you, Eliza. You've got spine. But I've got a business to run and a life to live, and I can't afford to get tangled up in Mercer trouble any more than I already am. You understand?" Eliza understood. She'd learned a long time ago that people only helped so far before they pulled back to protect themselves. She couldn't blame Ruth for it. "Thank you," she said. "For everything." Ruth squeezed her shoulder, then turned and mounted her mare. She looked down at Cole. "You remember what I said." "I will." Ruth nodded and rode off, disappearing into the trees. The sound of hoofbeats faded, and then there was just the wind and the three of them standing in the snow. Evan had finally loosened his grip on Cole. He looked at Eliza with red-rimmed eyes. "Are you coming with us?" Eliza started, but she didn't know how to finish. "We'll talk about it inside," Cole said. "Come on." They went into the cabin. It felt smaller with 3 people in it, the walls pressing close. Cole set Evan down and the boy immediately went to the stove, holding his hands out to the warmth. Eliza busied herself making coffee, needing something to do with her hands. Cole stood by the window, watching the trail. How long do you think before they come back? Ruth said days, maybe weeks. Eliza poured the coffee, her hands steadier now. But they will come. Yeah. Cole accepted the cup. I'm sorry. I never meant to drag you into this. You didn't drag me anywhere. I made my own choices. Eliza sat down at the table. But Ruth's right. You need to disappear. Really disappear. I've been trying for 6 years. Then you haven't been trying hard enough. Cole's jaw tightened. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Eliza leaned forward. You've been running, but you've been running scared. Looking over your shoulder every second. That's not disappearing. That's just waiting to get caught. What would you have me do? Stop running. Plant roots. Become someone Edmund can't find because he's looking for Cole Mercer, and that person doesn't exist anymore. Cole stared at her. You're talking about giving up who I am. You already did that. 6 years ago when you walked away. Eliza's voice was hard. The question is whether you're ready to commit to it, because half measures won't keep that boy safe. Evan was watching them, his eyes moving back and forth like he was following a tennis match. Cole saw him looking and his face softened. Come here, Ev. The boy came over and Cole pulled him onto his lap. Evan leaned against his chest, fitting perfectly into the space under his father's chin. What do you want? Cole asked quietly. You want to keep moving, or do you want to stay somewhere? Evan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I want a home, like Miss Eliza has. Cole's eyes closed. When he opened them, they were bright with something that might have been tears. Okay, he whispered. Okay. He looked at Eliza. If we stay, if we try to build something here, will you help us? Eliza wanted to say no, wanted to tell him this was his problem, his fight, his life to figure out. But she looked at Evan, small and tired and so desperate for something stable, and she felt the answer forming before she could stop it. For a while, she said carefully, until we figure out what comes next. Cole nodded. That's enough. They sat in silence, drinking coffee, while the fire crackled and the light outside started to fade. Eliza tried to think through what came next. If they were going to stay, they needed a plan. They needed to make the cabin more secure, lay in supplies, figure out how to defend themselves if more men came, and they needed to make sure Evan was protected no matter what happened. We should go to town, she said abruptly. Cole's head snapped up. What? Birch Hollow. Tomorrow, if the weather holds. We need supplies, and we need information. Eliza stood and started pacing. If Edmund's sending more men, someone will hear about it. Ruth might know something. And we need to establish that you're just some drifter I hired to help with the homestead. Give you a story that holds up if anyone asks questions. That's risky. Everything's risky now. Eliza stopped pacing and looked at him. But hiding up here won't work forever. We need allies, people who will vouch for us if trouble comes. Cole was quiet, thinking it through. Finally, he nodded. All right, but we keep it simple. I'm just hired help. No names, no history. What should we call you? He thought about it. Thomas. Thomas Grant. Eliza tested it. Thomas Grant. All right, and you're from where? Montana. Up north. Came south looking for work. And found it with me. Right. They worked out the rest of the story over dinner, simple stew made from Ruth's supplies. Evan listened, asking questions occasionally, adding details that made it feel more real. By the time they finished eating, they had something that sounded believable. That night, Eliza gave them the cot again. She made her pallet by the fire and lay there staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She'd committed herself to this now, to helping them, to putting herself in Edmund Mercer's crosshairs. She must be insane, but when she heard Evan's soft breathing, already asleep and feeling safe for the first time in who knew how long, she thought maybe insanity wasn't the worst thing to be. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Eliza woke to find Cole already up, feeding the fire. He moved quietly, trying not to wake Evan. Coffee's on, he said when he saw her stirring. Eliza sat up, groaning as her back protested. Sleeping on floors wasn't getting any easier. What time is it? Early. Sun's not up yet. and Cole poured 2 cups. I've been thinking about what you said about planting roots. And? And I think you're right, but there's something I need to do first. He sat down across from her. I need to go back, not to Edmond, to Philadelphia. There's money there, money I hid before I left. If I can get to it, we'd have enough to really disappear, buy land under a new name, build something that can't be taken away. Eliza felt her stomach drop. That's suicide. Maybe, but it's also the only way this works long term. Cole's voice was steady. I can't keep running with nothing. Can't build a life on hope and borrowed time. I need capital. How much are we talking about? Enough to buy a ranch, hire hands, set up something legitimate that'll throw Edmond off the scent. Cole leaned forward. He's looking for a desperate man dragging a child through the wilderness. He's not looking for a prosperous rancher with a family and a business. Eliza wanted to argue, but she couldn't find the flaw in his logic. And you think you can just waltz into Philadelphia and grab this money? I know where it is, and I know how to get to it without being seen. Cole's eyes were hard. I've been planning this for years, just never had a reason to risk it. Until now. Until now. Eliza drank her coffee, thinking. How long would it take? 2 weeks, maybe 3. Depends on the trains and whether I run into trouble. That's a long time to leave Evan. I know. Cole's voice cracked slightly. But if I take him with me, it's worse. Edmund's people will be watching for a man and a boy. Just me, I can blend in, move fast. And if you don't come back? Cole pulled something from his pocket, the thing Ruth had given him yesterday. It was a bank draft, Eliza realized, made out for a substantial sum. Ruth gave me this. It's enough to get you and Evan to that preacher in Grafton if something happens to me. She said he's a good man. He'll take care of Evan until he's grown. Eliza stared at the paper. You've got this all figured out. I've had 6 years to think about it. And what am I supposed to do while you're gone? Just sit here and wait? No. You go to Birch Hollow like you said, establish the story, make friends, build the life I'm going to step into when I get back. Cole folded the draft and pushed it across the table. This is insurance. If I don't come back in 3 weeks, you take Evan and you run. Don't wait for me. Don't come looking. Just go. Eliza picked up the draft. The amount made her head spin. Where did Ruth get this kind of money? She didn't. I did. I gave it to her 6 months ago for safekeeping. Told her if anything happened to me, to get it to Evan. Cole's smile was bitter. Didn't expect I'd be asking her to give it to a woman I'd known for 3 days. You're trusting me with your son. Yeah. Why? Cole met her eyes. Because you shot a man's hat off to save me. Because you didn't have to let us in that first night, and you did anyway. Because Evan trusts you, and that kid's got better instincts than I do. Eliza didn't know what to say to that. She tucked the draft into her pocket and stood. When do you leave? Today. Soon as Evan wakes up. I'll tell him I'm going to scout work in the next county. Keep it simple. He'll know you're lying. Probably. But he'll pretend he doesn't. Cole's voice was heavy. He's gotten good at that. They finished their coffee in silence. When Evan woke, Cole took him outside to talk. Eliza watched through the window as Cole crouched down, holding the boy's shoulders, speaking seriously. Evan nodded, his face pale but brave. When they came back inside, Evan's eyes were red, but he wasn't crying. I'm going to take good care of your papa while he's gone, Eliza said. Evan looked at her. You mean I'm going to take care of you? Despite everything, Eliza smiled. Yeah, that too. Cole gathered his few belongings, the saddle blanket, a change of clothes, what was left of the dried meat. He left the gun, pressing it into Eliza's hands. You'll need this more than me. I've got Ruth's pistol. Take both. His hands closed over hers. Please. Eliza nodded and took the gun. Cole turned to Evan and pulled him into a hug that lasted a long time. When he finally let go, his face was composed, but his eyes were wrecked. You be good for Miss Eliza. Help her out. Don't give her any trouble. I won't, Papa. And if I'm not back in 3 weeks, Papa, Evan's voice was firm. You'll be back. Cole's jaw worked. Then he nodded. Yeah, I will. He looked at Eliza one more time. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Then he was gone, walking down the mountain trail without looking back. Eliza and Evan stood in the doorway until he disappeared into the trees. The silence that followed felt enormous. "You want breakfast?" Eliza asked finally. "I'm not hungry." "Me neither, but we're going to eat anyway." They went inside and Eliza made Johnny cakes mechanically. Evan picked at his, not really eating. After a few minutes, he spoke. "He's going to do something dangerous, isn't he?" Eliza thought about lying, decided against it. "Yeah. To get money." "How'd you know?" "I heard you talking last night. I wasn't asleep yet." Evan looked up at her. "Is it enough money to make us safe?" "Your father thinks so." "Do you?" Eliza sat down across from him. "I think safety is not about money. It's about choices, and your father's making the choice to try and build something better for you. Even if it kills him." The words were matter of fact, no drama, just a child who'd seen too much and knew how the world worked. Eliza's chest ached. "He's going to be careful," she said, "and we're going to trust him to come back because that's all we can do." Evan nodded slowly. Then he said, "What if he doesn't?" Eliza reached across the table and took his hand. It was small and cold. "Then we'll figure it out, together, I promise." It was a promise she had no business making, but she made it anyway. They spent the rest of the morning in careful routine, feeding the fire, mending clothes, checking the woodpile. Eliza showed Evan how to set rabbit snares, how to read the weather in the clouds, how to tell good firewood from bad. The boy absorbed everything, asking smart questions, his hands quick and capable for someone so young. By afternoon, Eliza decided they couldn't put it off any longer. "We need to go to town, establish the story like I told your father." Evan's face went wary. "Is it safe?" "Safer than sitting here waiting for trouble to find us." Eliza pulled on her coat. "Besides, people need to see you. Need to know you're just a boy living on a homestead. Nothing special, nothing worth reporting." They took the trail down to Birch Hollow, Evan riding behind Eliza on the mare. The town was small, maybe 24 buildings clustered around a main street, with the supply store at the center. Eliza tied the mare outside and took Evan's hand. "Stay close. Don't talk unless someone talks to you first. And if anyone asks about your father, he's Thomas Grant from Montana. He's working for you on the homestead." Evan's voice was flat, reciting. "He's quiet and keeps to himself." "Good boy." They went inside. Ruth was behind the counter, helping an older woman with a bolt of fabric. She looked up when they entered, her face carefully neutral. "Miss Harrow, didn't expect to see you today." "Needed a few things." Eliza pulled out a list she'd written that morning. "And wanted to introduce Evan here. He's staying with me for a while." Ruth's eyes flicked to the boy, then back to Eliza. "That's so." "His father's working my land. Figured the boy could use some company besides grown folks." "Uh-huh." Ruth finished with her customer and came around the counter. She crouched down to Evan's level. "You like it up on that mountain?" Evan nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "It gets lonely up there. You sure you don't miss other kids?" "I like the quiet," Evan said. Ruth smiled. "Smart boy." She stood and pulled items off the shelves, filling Eliza's order. "How's that hired man working out? Thomas?" "He's fine. Good with an axe, anyway." Eliza counted out coins. "Keeps to himself mostly." "Where'd you find him?" "He came through looking for work. I needed the help." Eliza met Ruth's eyes. "He's reliable. That's all that matters." Ruth nodded, understanding the subtext. "Well, if you need anything else, you know where to find me." They left with their supplies. Outside, Eliza saw a few townspeople watching them. Not hostile, just curious. She nodded to them, keeping her face pleasant but not inviting conversation. Let them see her. Let them see Evan. Let them think this was all perfectly normal. They rode back as the sun started to set. Evan was quiet, pressed against her back, and Eliza wondered what he was thinking, whether he was scared, whether he understood how precarious all this was. Back at the cabin, they made dinner and ate by lamplight. Eliza tried to keep conversation going, but it felt forced. The cabin was too quiet without Cole's presence. "You miss him," Evan said suddenly. Eliza looked up. "What?" "Papa, you miss him." "I barely know him." "That doesn't mean you don't miss him." Evan's eyes were too knowing. "I can tell." Eliza set down her spoon. Yeah, I guess I do. He misses you too. He's known me 3 days. Like you said, doesn't matter. Evan smiled, small and sad. I think Papa's been lonely for a long time. I think you have too. Eliza's throat closed up. She wanted to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. Because the kid was right. She had been lonely. So lonely she'd convinced herself she preferred it, that solitude was safety. But these last few days, with Cole and Evan filling the cabin with noise and presence and life, she'd felt something shift. Something she'd thought was dead waking up again. Your father's a good man, she said finally. I know. And when he gets back, we're going to build something good. All of us. I know that too. Evan stood and started clearing the dishes. But first we have to wait, and waiting's the hard part. Eliza helped him clean up, and they settled in for the night. She let Evan take the cot while she made her pallet by the fire. Before he fell asleep, the boy spoke one more time. Miss Eliza? Yeah? Thank you for not leaving us. Eliza stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of that gratitude pressing down on her chest. She'd thought running to the mountains would keep her safe from this, from caring, from getting tangled up in other people's lives, from feeling responsible for anything beyond her own survival. But here she was, responsible for a 6-year-old boy while his father walked into danger, responsible for holding together a life she hadn't asked for. And the worst part was, she didn't want to walk away. Get some sleep, Evan, she said softly. His breathing evened out within minutes. Eliza lay awake much longer, watching the firelight dance on the walls, thinking about Cole, heading east into a city full of people who wanted to trap him. Thinking about Dawson and what he'd report back to Edmund Mercer. Thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. But also thinking about Evan's small hand in hers. About the way Cole had looked at her before he left, like she was something worth believing in. The wind picked up outside, rattling the shutters. Eliza closed her eyes and made herself a promise. She'd keep the boy safe. No matter what happened with Cole, no matter who came looking, she'd make sure Evan survived this. Even if it cost her everything. The first week without Cole crawled by like something wounded. Eliza kept herself busy, repairing the roof where the shingles had started to rot, splitting wood until her shoulders screamed, teaching Evan how to shoot the old shotgun even though the recoil nearly knocked him over. The boy was a quick study, soaking up everything she showed him with that quiet intensity that reminded her too much of his father. They fell into a rhythm. Mornings were for chores, feeding the fire, checking the snares, hauling water from the creek. Afternoons, Eliza worked on winterizing the cabin while Evan did his lessons. She'd found an old primer in the trunk, pages yellowed and mouse-chewed, and she made him read aloud while she patched holes in the walls with mud and straw. Evenings were the hardest. That's when the silence pressed in heaviest, when Evan would stare at the door like he could will his father to walk through it. Eliza tried to fill the quiet with stories, with card games using a deck so worn the suits were barely visible, with anything that would keep the boy from drowning in worry. On the 8th day, she decided they needed to go back to Birch Hollow, partly for supplies, partly to keep up appearances, mostly because staying on the mountain was making them both crazy. They rode down in the afternoon, the sky clear and cold. The town looked the same as it had the week before. A few people on the street, smoke rising from chimneys, the general store doing lazy business. Eliza tied up the mare and took Evan inside. Ruth was organizing shelves, her movements efficient and practiced. She glanced up when they entered. Back again so soon? Running low on flour, Eliza said, and I figured Evan could use a change of scenery. Ruth nodded and pulled a sack from the back. While she measured it out, a man came through the door, tall, weathered, wearing a marshal's star pinned to his vest. Eliza's pulse kicked up, but she kept her face neutral. The marshal nodded to Ruth. Afternoon, Mrs. Carver. Marshal Briggs? Ruth's voice was pleasant, but not warm. What brings you by? Just making rounds? Heard there's been some unusual activity in the area. His eyes landed on Eliza, then on Evan. Don't believe I've seen you two before. Eliza Harrow, she said, keeping her voice steady. I've got a homestead up on Timber Ridge. That's so. Briggs looked her over, taking in her worn coat and work-roughened hands. Long way up there. You manage it alone? I hired a man to help, Thomas Grant. He's doing repairs on the property. Grant, huh? Briggs pulled a small notebook from his pocket and made a note. Where's he from? Montana. He came through looking for work. Eliza met his eyes. Why? He in some kind of trouble? No, just keeping track of who's moving through the area. We had some trouble a week back. Railroad men passing through, bit rough with the locals. Wanted to make sure everyone's accounted for. Railroad men? Eliza's voice was carefully curious. What kind of trouble? Nothing serious. They were looking for someone. Got pushy when folks couldn't help them. Left a few days ago. Briggs closed his notebook. You see anyone unusual up on your ridge? Eliza shook her head. Haven't seen anyone but Thomas. It's pretty isolated up there. Briggs nodded slowly. His eyes moved to Evan, who was standing very still beside Eliza, his face blank. This your boy? I'm watching him while his father works, Eliza said. Figured he could use some stability. Kind of you. Briggs crouched down to Evan's level. What's your name, son? Evan looked at Eliza. She gave a tiny nod. Evan Grant, sir. You like it up on the mountain? Yes, sir. Not scared being so far from town? No, sir. Miss Eliza takes good care of me. Briggs smiled, but his eyes were sharp, cataloging details. That's good. Your pa treat you well? Yes, sir. He's a good pa. I'm sure he is. Briggs stood and tipped his hat to Eliza. Well, Miss Harrow, you have any trouble up there? You let me know. It's a long ride for help if something goes wrong. I appreciate that, Marshal. He left, and Eliza felt her shoulders relax slightly. Ruth finished measuring the flour and set it on the counter. That'll be $2. Eliza paid, and Ruth leaned in close. Briggs is all right, but he's thorough. He'll check your story if he gets curious. I figured. And those railroad men he mentioned? That was Dawson's bunch. They stopped here on their way back east. Ruth's voice was barely above a whisper. They were asking about a woman and a boy. Said the woman shot at them. Eliza's blood went cold. What'd you tell them? That I didn't know anything about it, and I made sure everyone else in town said the same. Ruth glanced toward the door, making sure they were alone. But Briggs heard the story. He's not stupid. If he puts together that you're the woman they were talking about, he'll have questions. He can ask all he wants. I'll tell him the same thing I told him today. And if Dawson comes back with proof, then I'll deal with it. Eliza picked up the flour. I'm not running again, Ruth. Not from Dawson, not from Edmund Mercer, not from anyone. Ruth studied her face, then nodded. All right, but be careful. Briggs is fair, but he's also a lawman. If the Mercer family comes at him with legal pressure, he'll have to act. They left the store and started back toward the mare. Eliza was halfway to the hitching post when she heard a woman's voice call out, Eliza? Eliza Harrow? Eliza turned. A woman was coming toward her, maybe 30, with dark hair and a kind face. She looked vaguely familiar, but Eliza couldn't place her. I'm sorry, Eliza said. Do I know you? Sarah Mitchell. We met a few years back at the church social. The woman smiled. You probably don't remember. There were a lot of people there. Eliza had a vague memory of a crowded room, too many voices, the feeling of walls closing in. She'd left early, made excuses, and never gone back. Right, Eliza said carefully. How are you? I'm well. I heard you're living up on Timber Ridge now. Sarah glanced at Evan. And that you've taken in a boy. That's very charitable of you. He's not charity. His father's working for me. Still, it must be nice having company up there. I always thought it seemed lonely. Sarah's smile was warm, but there was something in her eyes, pity, maybe, or judgment. If you ever need anything, you should come to the ladies' auxiliary meetings. We get together every Tuesday at the church. The thought of sitting in a room full of women making small talk and sizing each other up made Eliza's skin crawl. I appreciate the offer, but I'm pretty busy with the homestead. Of course, but the offer stands. Sarah touched Eliza's arm. It's good to see you doing well. She walked away, and Eliza let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Evan tugged her sleeve. Who was that? Someone who thinks she knows me. Eliza untied the mare. Come on, let's get home. They rode back in silence. Eliza's mind was churning. Briggs asking questions, Dawson's story spreading, Sarah Mitchell's pitying smile. The town was small, and people talked. It was only a matter of time before someone put the pieces together. That night, after Evan was asleep, Eliza sat by the fire and pulled out the bank draft Cole had left. She unfolded it, staring at the amount. Enough to run. Enough to take Evan and disappear before the trouble caught up with them. But Cole had trusted her to wait, and she'd promised Evan she wouldn't leave. She folded the draft and put it away. The days bled together. 9 days, 10, 11. Eliza started marking them on the wall beside her bed, scratching lines into the wood with a nail. Evan noticed but didn't comment. On the 12th day, the weather turned. The sky went heavy and gray, and snow started falling in thick, wet flakes. By afternoon, visibility was down to nothing. Eliza brought in extra wood and made sure the shutters were secure. "Storm's going to be bad," she told Evan. "We might be stuck inside for a few days." The boy nodded. He'd been quieter lately, spending more time staring out the window, watching for his father. That night, the wind picked up until the cabin shook. Snow piled against the door, sealing them in. Eliza tried to keep things normal, made dinner, played cards, told stories, but she could feel the tension building. In Evan. In herself. "He should have been back by now," Evan said suddenly. It was the first time he'd said it out loud. Eliza set down her cards. "It's only been 12 days. He said 2 to 3 weeks. "I know what he said." Evan's voice was tight. "But he also said he'd be careful. In storms like this, they shut down the trains. If he's trying to get back, he'll wait it out. He's not stupid enough to travel in this." "You don't know that." Eliza didn't. And that was the problem. She didn't know where Cole was, what he was doing, whether he'd gotten the money or been caught or was lying dead in some Philadelphia alley. The not knowing was eating her alive, and she couldn't imagine what it was doing to Evan. "Come here," she said quietly. Evan came over and she pulled him into her lap, something she hadn't done before. He was bigger than he looked, all sharp elbows and knobby knees, but he curled into her like he was still small. "Your father's smart," she said, "and he's tough. And he loves you more than anything in the world. He's going to come back." "How do you know?" "Because I've seen the way he looks at you. And men who love like that don't give up." Eliza rested her chin on his head. "We just have to trust him." Evan didn't answer, but his breathing evened out and his body relaxed against hers. They sat like that while the storm raged outside, and Eliza wondered if she was lying to him. Wondered if Cole was already dead and they just didn't know it yet. The storm lasted 3 days. When it finally broke, the world was buried under 2 feet of fresh snow. Eliza spent the morning digging out the door and clearing a path to the woodpile. Evan helped, his movements mechanical, his face blank. On the 15th day, they went to town again. Eliza didn't want to. The trail was treacherous and the cold was brutal. But they were running low on coffee, and she needed to hear if there was any news. Birch Hollow looked like something from a fairy tale. All the buildings frosted white, smoke curling from chimneys. They went into the store and found Ruth arguing with a man Eliza didn't recognize. "I don't care what you're offering," Ruth was saying, her voice sharp. "This store's not for sale." "Mrs. Carver, be reasonable. The railroad's expanding through here next year. Your property value is going to triple. I'm giving you a fair price now before everyone else realizes what's coming." "The answer's no." The man sighed. "You're making a mistake." "That's my right." Ruth's eyes were flinty. "Now, if you're not buying anything, get out!" The man left, shaking his head. Ruth turned to Eliza and Evan, her face tight with anger. "Railroad vultures," she muttered. "They've been sniffing around for months trying to buy up land cheap before they announced the route." "What route?" Eliza asked. "New line through the mountains. They want to connect the eastern cities to the timber camps out west, which means they need a right-of-way." Ruth started restocking shelves, her movements jerky. "And they don't care who they displace to get it." Eliza felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Would the route go through Timber Ridge?" "Don't know yet. They haven't announced the final plans, but I'd bet money they're going to try and grab every piece of land they can, including mine." Ruth stopped and looked at her. "Yeah, including yours." Eliza's mind raced. If the railroad was planning to build through her land, they'd try to buy her out. And if she refused, they'd find other ways. Legal ways. The kind that involved courts and lawyers and money she didn't have. The kind Edmund Mercer would have unlimited access to. "Ruth," Eliza said slowly, "is this connected to the Mercer family?" Ruth's face answered before her words did. "The expansion's being pushed by Mercer Railway. Edmund himself is spearheading it. He's been in Washington for months, greasing palms and making deals. So that was it. That was why Edmund needed Cole back. Not just for a board meeting, but for a massive expansion that would cement the family's power for generations. And Cole had walked right into the heart of it. I have to warn him, Eliza said. Warn who? Ruth asked. Then understanding dawned. Thomas is in Philadelphia. It wasn't a question. Eliza didn't bother denying it. He's been gone 15 days. He should have been back by now. Ruth closed her eyes. Damn fool. If Edmund catches him there, I know. Eliza gripped the counter. I have to go after him. Eliza, that's insane. You don't know where he is, what he's doing. You'd be walking blind into a city full of people looking for him. Then what am I supposed to do? Just wait? Yes. Ruth's voice was firm. You wait, and you protect that boy. Because if Cole's been caught, the best thing you can do is make sure Evan stays hidden. Eliza looked at Evan. The boy was standing very still, his face pale. He'd heard everything. Miss Eliza, he said quietly. Mrs. Carver's right. Papa wouldn't want you to risk yourself. And what if he needs help? Then he'll find a way. Evan's voice was steadier than it should have been. He always does. Eliza wanted to argue, but she saw the fear in the boy's eyes and knew Ruth was right. Going after Cole would mean leaving Evan alone or dragging him into danger. Either option was unthinkable. All right, she said finally. We wait. They bought their supplies and rode back to the cabin. The sun was setting by the time they arrived, painting the snow orange and gold. Eliza got the fire going while Evan put away the supplies. They moved around each other and practiced silence, and Eliza tried not to think about Cole walking the streets of Philadelphia, tried not to imagine him caught, trapped, forced back into the life he'd run from. That night, she lay awake long after Evan fell asleep. Tomorrow would be day 16. A week left on Cole's self-imposed deadline. 7 days to wait and wonder and hope. She'd never been good at hope. The 17th day came and went. Then the 18th. On the 19th day, Eliza was chopping wood when she heard horses coming up the trail. Her hands tightened on the axe. Too many horses to be Cole traveling alone. Evan, she called, get inside. The boy appeared in the doorway. What's wrong? Just do it. Now. Evan disappeared inside and Eliza moved toward the cabin, the axe still in her hands. The riders came into view, 4 of them, led by Marshal Briggs. Eliza's pulse kicked up, but she forced herself to stay calm. Marshal, she said as he pulled up. What brings you all the way up here? Briggs dismounted, his face grave. I need to ask you some questions, Miss Harrow. Official questions. About what? About a man named Cole Mercer. Briggs pulled out a wanted poster and handed it to her. The sketch was rough but recognizable. Cole's face, his dark eyes, the hard line of his jaw. The reward was staggering. I don't know anyone by that name, Eliza said carefully. No? Because I got a telegram from Philadelphia 3 days ago. Seems the Mercer family is offering a substantial reward for information leading to the capture of Cole Mercer and his 6-year-old son, Evan. They believe they're hiding somewhere in this area. Briggs watched her face. And I got to thinking about that hired man you mentioned, Thomas Grant from Montana. Funny thing, I sent some inquiries up north. Nobody's heard of a Thomas Grant matching his description. Eliza's grip tightened on the axe. Plenty of drifters use false names, Marshal. Doesn't make them criminals. No, but running from a lawful summons does. Briggs gestured to his deputies. I need to search your property, Miss Harrow. And I need to see the boy. You got a warrant? Don't need one. This is a federal matter now. Briggs's voice was apologetic but firm. I'm sorry, but I have to do my job. Eliza stepped between him and the cabin. That boy is under my protection, and I'm not letting you take him anywhere. One of the deputies moved his hand toward his gun. Briggs held up a hand, stopping him. Miss Harrow, I understand you want to help. But if that child is Evan Mercer, his family has legal custody. They want him home. Safe. Safe? Eliza's laugh was bitter. You don't know what you're talking about. Then explain it to me. And there it was, the choice. She could tell Briggs everything, about Edmund, about the threats, about Cole's desperate run to Philadelphia. She could trust the law to do the right thing, or she could fight. Eliza raised the axe. "You're not taking that boy." The deputies tensed. Briggs sighed. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." "I'm not making anything hard. I'm making it impossible." Eliza's voice was steel. "You want to get to Evan? You go through me." Briggs stared at her, calculating. Then he did something she didn't expect. He smiled. "All right, Miss Harrow, you win. For now." He mounted his horse. "But I'm coming back with a warrant and more men. And when I do, you're going to have to make a real choice. Stand aside or face federal charges for obstruction." "When's that going to be? 3 days? Maybe 4? Briggs gathered his reins. "Think hard about what you're doing. That boy deserves better than being dragged into a fight between you and his family." They rode away, and Eliza stood there shaking, the axe heavy in her hands. Evan came out slowly. "They're going to come back," he said. "Yeah. What do we do?" Eliza looked at him, small, scared, trying so hard to be brave, and she made a decision. "We fight." She spent the next 2 days preparing. She moved their supplies into the root cellar, made sure the guns were loaded and ready, reinforced the door and shutters. If Briggs came back with men, she'd make him work for it. On the 21st day, as the sun was setting, she heard a single horse coming up the trail. She grabbed the shotgun and positioned herself by the window. Evan was already in the root cellar, hidden. The rider came into view, and Eliza's breath caught. It was Cole. He looked like hell, unshaven, exhausted, his clothes torn and dirty. But he was alive. He was here. Eliza threw open the door and ran out. Cole dismounted and caught her, and for a moment they just held each other, neither one speaking. "Did you get it?" she finally asked. Cole pulled back and showed her a leather satchel. "Every penny." "Briggs knows, the marshal. He came here asking about you and Evan. He's coming back with a warrant." Cole's face hardened. "When?" "A day, maybe 2. "Then we don't have much time." He looked toward the cabin. "Where's Ev?" "Safe, hiding," Eliza called out. "Evan, it's okay. Your father's here." The boy burst from the root cellar and threw himself at Cole, who caught him and lifted him up, holding on like he'd never let go. Eliza watched them, feeling something in her chest crack open. Cole set Evan down and turned to her. "I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it." "What?" "I went to Edmund, talked to him face to face." Eliza felt her blood run cold. "You what?" "I had to. It was the only way to end this." Cole's voice was steady. "I told him I'd sign over my inheritance rights, all of it. In exchange, he leaves us alone, permanently." "And he agreed?" "He did. I've got the papers right here, signed and notarized." Cole pulled documents from the satchel. "As of 3 days ago, I'm no longer Cole Mercer. I'm nobody. I've got no claim to the family, the money, the name, nothing." Eliza stared at him. "You gave up everything." "No, I gave up nothing that mattered." Cole looked at Evan, then at her. "And I got everything I need. But Briggs is looking for Cole Mercer, heir to a railroad fortune. That person doesn't exist anymore." Cole's smile was grim. "Edmund got what he wanted, total control of the company, and I got what I wanted, freedom. We're both satisfied." "It can't be that simple." "It's not. Edmund's got pride, and someday that might bring him back around. But for now, we've got breathing room." Cole stepped closer. "And I've got enough money to buy land, real land, with a deed and a name Edmund will never connect to me. We can build something, Eliza, something that lasts." Eliza looked at the papers in his hands, at the satchel full of money, at Evan watching them both with hope in his eyes. And she thought about Marshal Briggs writing back with a warrant for a man who no longer existed. Thought about starting over, building something new, taking a chance on something impossible. "Where?" she asked. "Wherever you want," Cole said. "Just say the word." Eliza looked at the cabin, small, drafty, perched on a mountain she'd chosen because it was far from everyone and everything. It had been her hiding place, her prison. But maybe it was time to stop hiding. "Somewhere with good water," she said, "and enough land to run cattle, and far enough from any railroad that Edmund Mercer's name doesn't mean a damn thing." Cole's grin was the first real one she'd seen from him. "I know just the place." They left before dawn the next morning, taking only what they could carry. Eliza stood in the cabin one last time, looking at the rough walls she'd patched with her own hands, the stove she'd fed every morning for 3 years, the marks on the doorframe where she'd tracked the seasons. This place had saved her once, given her somewhere to hide when the world had gotten too sharp and too cruel. But she didn't need hiding anymore. Cole was loading the last of their supplies onto the pack horse when Eliza came out. Evan was already mounted, clutching the reins with determined hands. The boy looked older somehow, like the last 3 weeks had aged him in ways that had nothing to do with time. "You ready?" Cole asked. Eliza took one last look at the cabin, then swung into the saddle. "Yeah, let's go." They rode down the mountain as the sun came up, turning the snow pink and gold. By the time they reached Birch Hollow, the town was just waking up, smoke rising from chimneys, a few early risers moving along the street. Cole pulled his hat low, and they rode straight to Ruth's store. Ruth was sweeping the front steps when they arrived. She looked up, saw the three of them packed and ready to travel, and nodded once. "Wondered when you'd come." They tied the horses and went inside. Ruth locked the door behind them and pulled the shade. "Briggs came by yesterday," she said without preamble. "Said he's got a warrant coming from the federal court. He'll be back tomorrow with enough men to take this whole mountain apart if he has to." "We won't be here," Cole said. "Good." Ruth went to the back room and returned with a wrapped package. Supplies for the road, and something else. She handed Cole a thick envelope. "Deed to a property in Wyoming. 300 acres, water rights included. It's in the name Thomas Grant." Cole stared at the envelope. "Ruth, I can't." "You can and you will. I bought it 2 years ago as an investment. Never did anything with it. Now I am." Ruth's voice was firm. "The land's good, remote. No railroad anywhere near it. You can build something there that nobody can touch." "How much do I owe you?" "Nothing. Consider it payment for the most interesting 3 weeks this town's had in a decade." Ruth smiled, but her eyes were serious. "Now get out of here before Briggs shows up and I have to lie to a federal marshal." Eliza stepped forward and pulled Ruth into a hug. The older woman went stiff for a moment, then relaxed and hugged her back. "Thank you," Eliza said quietly, "for everything." "You did the hard part," Ruth said. "I just opened a few doors. Now go build yourself a life." They left through the back, keeping to the alleys until they were clear of town. Once they hit the main road heading west, Cole pushed them hard. They rode for hours, stopping only to rest the horses and let Evan stretch his legs. The boy didn't complain, just climbed back in the saddle when it was time and kept going. By nightfall, they'd put 20 miles between themselves and Birch Hollow. They made camp in a stand of cottonwoods near a frozen creek, and Cole built a small fire while Eliza set up their bedrolls. Evan helped where he could, his movements automatic, his mind clearly elsewhere. After they'd eaten, salt pork and hard biscuits from Ruth's package, Evan finally spoke. "Are they going to keep looking for us?" Cole looked at him across the fire. "Maybe. For a while. But every day we're gone, the trail gets colder. And once we're established in Wyoming with new names and legal papers, there's nothing connecting us to Cole Mercer or the old life. What if they find us anyway?" "Then we'll deal with it." Cole's voice was steady. "But I don't think they will. Edmund got what he wanted. The company, the power, the legacy. I'm just a loose end now. And loose ends aren't worth the trouble once they're cut." Eliza stirred the fire with a stick. "You sound pretty sure of that." "I am. I know my father. He's practical above all else. Chasing me costs money and time and creates risk. Letting me go costs him nothing." Cole's jaw tightened. "He'll tell the board I died. Some tragic accident. They'll mourn appropriately and move on, and Edmund will have exactly what he's always wanted. Total control, no complications." "That doesn't bother you? Being dead to him?" Cole's laugh was short and bitter. "No, that's freedom." They sat in silence for a while, watching the flames dance. Then Evan spoke again, his voice small. "I don't want to be Evan Mercer anymore." Cole looked at him. "What do you want to be?" "Just Evan." "Evan Grant?" The boy met his father's eyes. "I want to be someone new, someone who doesn't have to run." Cole's throat worked. He reached out and pulled Evan close. "Then that's who you are. Evan Grant, my son, nobody else's." Eliza watched them, feeling like she was intruding on something private. But then Evan looked at her. "What about you, Miss Eliza? Are you going to be someone new, too?" Eliza thought about it. Eliza Harrow had been running just as much as Cole Mercer had, running from disappointment, from betrayal, from a world that had taught her that trusting people only led to pain. But sitting here by this fire with these two people who'd somehow become hers, she didn't feel like running anymore. "Yeah," she said finally. "I think I am." They traveled for 10 days, heading northwest through country that got wilder and emptier with each mile. They passed through small towns where nobody looked twice at a family heading west, stopped at trading posts to resupply, slept under the stars when the weather was clear, and huddled in whatever shelter they could find when it wasn't. Evan started to relax. He talked more, asked questions about Wyoming, wondered out loud what their new house would look like. Cole told him stories about ranching, about cattle drives and roundups, and the hard, honest work of building something from nothing. Eliza listened and added her own thoughts, her own dreams of what they might create. And slowly, something shifted between the three of them. They stopped being strangers thrown together by circumstance and started being something else, something that felt like family. On the 11th day, they crossed into Wyoming. The land here was different, rolling plains that stretched forever, broken by rocky outcrops and stands of pine. The sky was bigger than anything Eliza had ever seen, huge and blue and unmarked by smoke or civilization. Cole checked the deed against Ruth's hand-drawn map and guided them north. 2 days later, they found it. The property sat in a valley between two ridges, with a creek running through it that hadn't frozen over yet. There were the remains of an old homestead, a collapsed cabin, a half-standing barn, fences that had mostly rotted away. But the land itself was beautiful. Rich grass, good water, timber for building. It was everything Ruth had promised and more. Cole dismounted and stood looking at it, his expression unreadable. Evan climbed down and ran to the creek, testing the water with his hand. "It's not frozen," he called back. "Papa, the water's running." Eliza joined Cole. "What do you think?" "I think it's perfect." His voice was rough. "I think we can build something here that nobody can take away. It's going to be hard work. Everything worth doing is." They set up camp that first night near the old cabin's foundation. Tomorrow they'd start figuring out what could be salvaged and what needed to be rebuilt. But tonight, they just sat and looked at the land that was going to be their future. "We need a name," Evan said suddenly. "For the ranch. All good ranches have names." Cole smiled. "What do you think we should call it?" Evan thought about it, his face serious. "Three Rivers Ranch, because there's three of us, and because rivers keep flowing no matter what." Eliza felt her eyes sting. "That's perfect. Three Rivers Ranch it is," Cole agreed. He raised his tin cup of coffee. "To new beginnings." They toasted, and Eliza thought about how strange life was. How 3 weeks ago she'd been alone on a mountain, and now she was sitting by a fire with a man and a boy she'd somehow become responsible for. How one choice, opening a door in a storm, had changed everything. The next morning, they started work. Cole surveyed the old structures, making notes on what could be saved. Eliza walked the property lines, getting a feel for the land. Evan collected firewood and helped where he could, his energy boundless now that they'd stopped running. By the end of the first week, they had a plan. They'd rebuild the barn first. They needed shelter for the horses and supplies before winter hit hard. Then they'd work on a cabin, something small to start, but built solid enough to expand later. In the spring, they'd buy cattle and start building the herd. It was ambitious, maybe too ambitious. But for the first time in years, Eliza felt like she was working towards something instead of just surviving. The days fell into a rhythm. Cole and Eliza worked side by side, raising walls and mending fences and learning each other's strengths and weaknesses. Cole was good with his hands, patient and methodical. Eliza was scrappy, willing to improvise when things didn't go according to plan. Together, they made it work. Evan helped where he could and studied his lessons when he couldn't. Eliza had brought the old primer from the cabin, and she made him read and do sums every evening by firelight. The boy complained sometimes, but not much. He seemed to understand that education was going to be important in this new life they were building. 3 weeks into the work, they had the barn finished and had started on the cabin. Cole was on the roof laying shingles when Eliza heard horses approaching. Her hand went automatically to the rifle leaning against the wall. "Evan," she said quietly. "Inside." The boy disappeared into the barn. Cole climbed down, his face tense. They'd known this moment would come eventually. Strangers asking questions, neighbors wondering who the new people were. The question was whether these were just curious locals or something worse. Two riders came into view, a man and a woman, both middle-aged, dressed in practical work clothes. The man raised his hand in greeting. "Afternoon," he called. "Hope we're not intruding." Cole stepped forward, keeping his body between the riders and the barn. "Can I help you?" "Name's Bill Harper. This is my wife Clara. We've got a spread about 10 miles east of here." Bill dismounted slowly, keeping his movements non-threatening. Saw smoke, figured we'd come introduce ourselves. Don't get many new neighbors out this way. "Thomas Grant," Cole said, offering his hand. "This is Eliza Harrow. We just bought this property." Bill shook his hand, his grip firm. Clara smiled at Eliza. "Nice to meet you both. You planning to run cattle?" "That's the plan," Cole said. "Soon as we get the place built up." "Good land for it. Creek never runs dry, even in drought years." Bill looked around at the construction. "You doing all this yourselves?" "We are." "That's ambitious. If you need help come roundup season, you let us know. We do a cooperative with the other ranches in the area. Share hands, share equipment, makes it easier on everyone." Clara dismounted and approached Eliza. "I brought some preserves and fresh bread. Figured you might be tired of trail food." Eliza accepted the basket, surprised by the gesture. "That's very kind of you. We look after each other out here," Clara said simply. "It's too hard a life not to." She glanced toward the barn. "You have a child." Eliza hesitated, but Evan had already emerged, his curiosity winning out over caution. Clara's face softened. "Well, hello there. What's your name?" "Evan Grant, ma'am." "Pleased to meet you, Evan. How old are you?" 6. "Same age as our youngest. You should come by sometime. He'd love to have someone to play with." Clara looked at Eliza. "We have a school of sorts. 3 families get together once a week. The kids do lessons. If you're interested." Eliza glanced at Cole. He gave a tiny nod. "We might be," Eliza said carefully, "once we're more settled." They talked for a while longer, about the weather, about the other families in the area, about the town of Red Creek, 30 miles north, where they could buy supplies. Bill gave them advice on where to buy cattle, which breeds did well in this climate, how to protect against predators. It was all practical, friendly, the kind of conversation between neighbors who understood the value of helping each other survive. When the Harpers finally left, Eliza felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Real hope, not the desperate kind that came from running, but the solid kind that came from planting roots. "They seemed nice," she said to Cole. "Yeah, they did." Cole watched the riders disappear over the ridge. "Think we can trust them?" "I think we don't have a choice. We can't do this alone." Cole nodded slowly. "No, I guess we can't." The months passed. Fall turned to winter and they finished the cabin just before the first heavy snow. It was small, 2 rooms, a loft for Evan, but it was solid and warm and theirs. They spent the winter making furniture, planning for spring, teaching Evan and telling stories by the fire. Other neighbors came by, families with names like Johnson and Martinez and Chen. They brought food, offered advice, invited them to gatherings. Slowly, carefully, Eliza and Cole let themselves become part of the community. They went to barn raisings and harvest celebrations. They traded work and shared meals. They became Thomas and Eliza Grant, ranchers, unremarkable except for their willingness to work hard and help their neighbors. And nobody asked questions about where they'd come from or what they'd left behind. In the spring, they bought their first cattle, 20 head to start, scraggly things that had survived a hard winter. Cole and Eliza worked them like they'd been ranching their whole lives, learning as they went, making mistakes and fixing them. Evan helped where he could, growing stronger and more capable with each passing week. One evening in late spring, after they'd branded the last calf, Cole and Eliza sat on the porch, watching the sunset. Evan was inside doing his lessons, his voice carrying through the window as he read aloud. "You ever think about going back?" Eliza asked quietly. "To the old life?" Cole was quiet for a long moment. "No, that person's dead. I made sure of it." "Do you miss it? The money? The power?" I miss thinking I knew who I was supposed to be. Cole's voice was thoughtful. I spent 30 years being groomed to run an empire. Everything I did, every choice I made, it was all leading toward that. And then I walked away from it, and for a long time I didn't know what I was for anymore. And now? Now I know I'm for this, for building something honest, for raising a good kid, for... He stopped, struggling with the words. For what? Eliza prompted. Cole turned to look at her. For making a life with someone who sees me for who I actually am, not who I'm supposed to be. Eliza's breath caught. They'd worked side by side for months now, building this ranch, raising Evan, becoming partners in every practical sense. But they'd never named what was growing between them, never acknowledged that somewhere between the mountain cabin and this Wyoming valley, they'd become more than just people thrown together by circumstance. Thomas, he corrected gently. Cole died in Philadelphia. I'm Thomas now. Thomas, then. Eliza's voice was soft. What are you saying? I'm saying I want this to be real. Not just a story we're telling to stay safe, but the actual truth. He reached over and took her hand. I'm saying I want to build this life with you, if you'll have me. Eliza looked down at their joined hands, his rough from work, hers scarred from 3 years of surviving alone. She thought about how far they'd both come, how much they'd both lost, how much they'd found. Yeah, she said finally, I'll have you. Thomas smiled, a real smile, unguarded and genuine. He leaned over and kissed her, gentle and careful, like she was something precious he didn't want to break. When they pulled apart, Evan was standing in the doorway, trying not to grin. About time, the boy said. I was starting to think you were both too stubborn to figure it out. Eliza laughed. How long have you been standing there? Long enough. Evan came out and sat between them. So does this mean we're a real family now? Thomas put his arm around the boy. We've been a real family for a while, Ev. We're just making it official. They sat together on the porch as the stars came out, and Eliza thought about all the ways life could surprise you. How opening a door in a storm could lead to this, to a home, a family, a future that felt solid and real. 2 years later, Three Rivers Ranch was thriving. They'd expanded the herd to 100 head, hired 2 hands to help with the work, built onto the cabin until it was a proper house. Evan was 8 now, tall and confident, splitting his time between ranch work and lessons with the other children in the valley. Thomas and Eliza had married quietly the previous spring, with Bill Harper standing as witness and Clara making a cake that Evan declared the best thing he'd ever tasted. It was a small ceremony, nothing like the society wedding Thomas would have had in his old life, but it meant more because it was theirs. They'd built something real here, something that couldn't be bought or inherited or taken away. It was hard work, ranching always was, but it was honest work, the kind that made you tired in your bones but satisfied in your soul. One afternoon in late summer, Thomas came in from checking the north pasture to find Eliza standing at the window reading a letter. Her face was pale. What is it? She handed him the letter without speaking. It was from Ruth, brief and to the point. Edmund Mercer had died 3 weeks ago, heart attack, sudden, no suffering. The funeral had been attended by hundreds. The papers had called him a titan of industry, a visionary, a man who'd built an empire. Thomas read it twice, then set it down. He waited for some feeling, grief, relief, anger. But all he felt was a distant sadness for the man his father might have been if he'd ever learned that people were worth more than profit margins. Are you all right? Eliza asked. Yeah, I am. Thomas pulled her close. He was my father. I can't change that, but he stopped being my dad a long time ago. Will this change anything? For us? Thomas thought about it. The empire would pass to distant cousins or business partners. Someone would take over the company. The Mercer name would continue, but none of that had anything to do with Thomas Grant, rancher, husband, father. No, he said finally, it doesn't change anything. That evening, they told Evan. The boy listened quietly, then asked a question that surprised them both. Do you think he ever regretted it, choosing the company over you? Thomas considered that. I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe he thought he was doing the right thing, building something that would last longer than any one person. But it didn't make him happy. No, it didn't. Evan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm glad you chose different." Thomas felt his throat tighten. "Me too, Ev. Me too." They buried the letter in the garden that night, not out of disrespect, but as a way of putting the past finally to rest. What was done was done. Edmund Mercer was gone, and the life he'd tried to force on his son had died with him. 5 years after that, Three Rivers Ranch was one of the most successful operations in the valley. They'd expanded to 500 head of cattle, employed a dozen hands year-round, and had built a reputation for fair dealing and quality stock. Evan was 13 now, already working alongside the men, learning the business from the ground up. He talked about maybe going to the new agricultural college in a few years, coming back with ideas for improving the ranch. Thomas and Eliza sat on their porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. They'd added to the house again, a proper parlor, a bigger kitchen, bedrooms for the children they hoped might still come. But even if it was just the three of them, that would be enough. "You ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't opened that door?" Eliza asked. Thomas considered it. "You'd probably still be on your mountain, and Evan and I would probably be dead in a snowbank somewhere." "That's grim, but true." Thomas took her hand. "You saved us. More than just that night. You saved us from the life we were running from." "I didn't do that. You did. You're the one who had the guts to walk into Edmund's office and sign away everything. Only because you made me believe there was something worth signing it away for." Eliza leaned her head on his shoulder. "I spent 3 years on that mountain convincing myself I was better off alone, that people only brought pain, and then you showed up and proved me wrong." "We proved each other wrong," Thomas said. "I thought running was the only way to protect Evan. You showed me that planting roots was stronger than running ever could be." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their world. The cattle grazing in the distance. The barn Evan had helped rebuild after last year's storm. The land that stretched out forever, promising and challenging and theirs. "You think Evan's happy?" Eliza asked. "Look at him." Evan was down by the creek, teaching one of the younger hands how to rope a stubborn calf. His laugh carried across the valley, bright and genuine and free. "Yeah," Thomas said. "I think he's happy." That night, after Evan had gone to bed and the hands had retired to the bunkhouse, Thomas and Eliza stood together, looking at the stars. The sky here was so clear you could see forever, millions of points of light stretching into infinity. "You know what I learned from all this?" Thomas said quietly. "What?" "That freedom isn't about having no ties. It's about choosing the ties that matter." He turned to face her. "I spent 6 years running from my father's expectations, thinking that if I could just get far enough away, I'd be free. But I was still trapped because I was still running. It wasn't until I stopped and chose to build something, chose you, chose this place, chose this life, that I actually became free." Eliza understood exactly what he meant. She'd run to that mountain thinking isolation would protect her from being hurt again. But isolation had just been another kind of prison. It wasn't until she'd risked everything to save 2 strangers that she'd found what she'd been looking for all along. "We're all just trying to figure out where we belong," she said. "And sometimes the answer isn't where we thought it would be." "No," Thomas agreed. "Sometimes it's in a place we never expected, with people we barely knew, building something we never thought we'd have." He kissed her, and she kissed him back. And above them the stars wheeled on in their ancient patterns, indifferent and eternal. 10 years after Thomas Grant and his son had ridden into Wyoming, Three Rivers Ranch employed 30 people and ran over 1,000 head of cattle. Evan was 22 now, managing the operation alongside his parents, already making a name for himself as someone who understood both the old ways and the new innovations. He'd gone to agricultural college like he'd planned, come back with ideas about selective breeding and rotational grazing that had doubled their yields in 3 years. Thomas and Eliza had 2 more children now. A daughter named Sarah, who was 8 and had her mother's sharp tongue and quick mind, and a son named James, who was 5 and followed Evan everywhere like a shadow. The house had grown to accommodate them all, sprawling and comfortable, always full of noise and life. Sometimes Thomas would stand on the porch and marvel at how far they'd come. From that desperate night in a mountain cabin to this, a thriving ranch, a family, a legacy that had nothing to do with railroad empires or inherited wealth. This was something they'd built with their own hands, earned through hard work and stubbornness and refusing to give up. One evening, Evan found Thomas alone in the barn, checking on a mare that was close to foaling. "Can I ask you something?" Evan said. "Always." "Do you ever regret it? Giving up the Mercer fortune?" Thomas looked at his son, tall and capable, confident in who he was and what he wanted from life. A man who'd never had to wonder if people liked him for himself or for his name. A man who knew the value of honest work because he'd done it all his life. "Not even once," Thomas said. "That money would have come with strings, expectations, a life that wasn't mine. I would have been rich, but I wouldn't have been free. And this?" Evan gestured at the barn, the ranch beyond. "This is freedom?" "This is choice," Thomas corrected. "I chose your mother, chose this place, chose to build something that belongs to us, not because we inherited it, but because we made it. That's worth more than any amount of money." Evan nodded slowly. "I'm glad. I like being Evan Grant. I like knowing that everything we have, we earned." "So do I," Thomas said, and he meant it. That night, the whole family gathered for dinner. Thomas and Eliza, Evan and his new wife Mary, Sarah and James making noise and stealing food off each other's plates. The conversation flowed around the table, talk of spring roundup and market prices, and whether they should expand the south pasture. It was ordinary, unremarkable. The kind of evening that happened in houses across the valley every night. And it was everything. After the children had been put to bed and Evan and Mary had retired to their own cabin across the yard, Thomas and Eliza sat on the porch one more time. It had become their ritual over the years. This quiet time at the end of the day, just the two of them, watching the world settle into darkness. "You think we did right by him?" Eliza asked. "Evan, raising him out here, away from everything. I think we gave him what every child deserves," Thomas said. "Safety, love, the chance to become himself instead of what someone else wanted him to be." "He turned out good." "Yeah, he did." Thomas smiled. "Better than I had any right to expect, considering we were making it up as we went." "We're still making it up." "That's the secret nobody tells you. Everyone's making it up. The ones who admit it are just more honest." Eliza laughed. "When did you get so wise?" "I'm not wise. I'm just old enough to know what matters." He pulled her close. "And what matters is this. Right here. This moment, this place, these people. Everything else is just noise." They sat together as the stars came out, and Eliza thought about the woman she'd been on that mountain, scared, alone, convinced that safety meant keeping everyone at arm's length. That woman wouldn't recognize her life now, wouldn't believe that opening a door in a storm could lead to all of this. But maybe that was the point. Maybe we never really know what we're capable of until we're forced to choose between the person we've been and the person we could be. Maybe bravery isn't about never being scared. It's about being scared and choosing to open the door anyway. "Thank you," Thomas said quietly. "For what?" "For letting us in. For taking a chance on two strangers. For believing we were worth saving." Eliza thought about that night. The knock on the door, the decision that should have been simple but wasn't, the way her whole life had changed in the space of a single choice. "I didn't save you," she said. "We saved each other." And sitting there on that porch, with the ranch stretching out before them and their family safe inside, Eliza knew it was true. They'd all been running from something, Thomas from a legacy that would have destroyed him, Evan from a childhood of fear and instability, Eliza from a world that had taught her trust was dangerous. But they'd stopped running. They'd planted roots in this wild, unforgiving land and built something that couldn't be taken away. Not by powerful men with money, not by the past, not by fear. They'd built a home, a real one, the kind that existed not in walls and roofs, but in the choice to stay, to trust, to build something together that was stronger than anything they could have managed alone. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Somewhere a coyote called, lonely and wild. The cattle shifted in the pasture, settling in for the night. And Three Rivers Ranch kept breathing, kept growing, kept being exactly what they'd made it. A place where broken people could become whole again, where running could finally stop, where a knock on a door in a storm could lead to everything.